Hello everybody and welcome to BrickVault. In this video I have the immense pleasure of presenting to you guys one of the most profoundly awesome LEGO creations that we've ever built here in the studio. This is the Eviscerator Imperial Star Destroyer designed by 2 Impaired. It is the largest single creation we've ever put together in terms of pieces, and it comes out to just shy of 20,000 parts. And the Star Destroyer remains one of the single most iconic ships in the last half century roughly, and this may be one of the single best examples of detailing done right. The extra parts truly elevate the presence of this model in a way that few creations could hope to achieve. Before I jump into the ocean of details that this model has, I do want to say first that if you are at all interested in building this giant model for yourself, then the instructions can be found at our web store, www.brickvault.toys. Included with the purchase is the PDF step-by-step building guide and the digital parts list for quickly uploading all the parts you'll need to make this build happen. And like all creations in the web store, the instructions have been troubleshot and tested thoroughly to make sure the build goes as smooth as possible. Getting instructions is a great way to help support what we do here at the channel, and it also is an immense support for the amazingly talented designers that we work with, like 2 Impaired. So you can click the link in the description below if you like, and let's get back to the Imperial Star Destroyer. Now, I said in the beginning that the name of this ship is the Eviscerator. It played a big role in Star Wars Battlefront 2, and it's the one you board at the end during the Battle of Jakku. It suffers a similar fate as the one you see in Force Awakens, though it's not that one specifically, and I can definitely appreciate that the designer decided to give this model a name with a really great backstory, but physically, what does this mean? It means the ship is an Imperial 2 Star Destroyer and not the Imperial 1 like we saw in A New Hope. Though there may be several differences in lore and on paper, the most notable difference between these 2 Star Destroyers is that the sensor tower on the top is a little bit shorter for the Imperial 2. I'll be doing a bit of a comparison with the other 2 UCS Star Destroyers and this model at the very end, and you can definitely see what I'm talking about there. So, when it comes to the model itself, we are looking at a beast. This ship is 46 inches long, or 117 centimeters, 29 inches wide, 73 centimeters, and 20 inches tall, or 51 centimeters. This makes it the longest ship in our possession, but truly the impressive thing here is its somewhat ability to eat pieces. I don't know how else to describe that. Underneath all of this intricate detailing is a reinforced Technic frame that'll make your head spin. It's a combination of Technic bricks, lift arms, and plates, and this frame is just excellent at keeping the tip of that pizza shape of the ship from drooping down, and also all of the toppings or panels and plates and tiles are attached incredibly strong as well. In a pinch, you could probably use this model as an excellent form of home defense. But right, joking aside, the thick frame makes this the heaviest model in our collection, coming out to 37 pounds or nearly 17 kilos. That's absolutely insane. I will show you how I move this behemoth around towards the end of the video, but for now I just want to pour over the closer details of the model. And I suppose we'll start off by taking a look at this model from behind first. The Star Destroyer has 3 main thrusters that are very big, and then another 4 that are a little bit smaller and split into pairs of 2. What you'll notice right off the bat is once again the studless look that you saw on the top of the ship is very much present in the back here, in the diamond shape back of the ship, and it's a combination of bricks built on their sides and lots of tiled sub-assemblies that make up different angles of this walled back area. The larger thrusters are made up of the same Millennium Falcon cockpit piece that we saw recently from the last UCS model, and there's also an interesting kind of tension-held ratcheted joint that's wrapped around the outside, gives it a little bit more volume and some interesting sort of greebling texture. And then as we move around, you can just see all kinds of details popping through. Some of the detailing that is unique to just the back, I would say, is the gray paint roller pieces used as sort sort of piping detailing by the smaller engines. There's a handful of those bent macaroni bars that make up larger pipes. Some modified bricks with little handlebars sticking out the side make up some interesting detailing. I see an engine intake spotted on the top and bottom, along with different sized cylinders. There's lots and lots of other details that could be mentioned. These are just some of the personal highlights that I like. And by the way, these details are incredibly accurate to how these ships looked in the movies. A lot of this isn't necessarily creative liberty, so much as poring over the very specific details that you can find in reference material. Lots of people have their own ideas about making thruster effects in the back. It's mostly white with a little bit of blue tinge. From what I can tell. Even some shots, the glowing thrusters look completely white. And if you wanted to add those types of effects, it'd be very, very easy to modify. But I decided to go with the original designer's idea, which is that this is more based on a studio, like a film studio model. So those baseline thruster effects would have been added after the fact. Now, zooming out a little bit, the back is great because it's kind of a microcosm of all the different building techniques that you can see in this model. Just above is a huge area of greebling. The most common parts found here are a combination of the different 1x1 clips, different length bar pieces, panels, ice skates, little pistol pieces, bullion, and I'll talk about how precise that stuff really needs to be maybe a little bit later, but let's check out this back neck port of the Star Destroyer. I really appreciate that the garbage chute doors are partially open. They're just splitting a little bit there in the back, and this whole center area here that we're looking at actually rests in there with tension. It's not studded in, but in fact actually fits quite snug. Now, while the shot is set up here kind of low at the back of the Star Destroyer, I think it's worth pointing out some of the nicer details that you can see tiled along the flat surface, because it's really not a very flat ship. The designer managed to get lines of detailing running across the Star Destroyer that don't just rest a single plate higher here and there, but in fact he's got this great looking line that runs across the edge of this ship that is resting like a half plate or maybe even slightly less. So it's recessed in a fun way, and that mixed in with a series of tiles and double plated tiles and studs sticking out show several different layers just along the top surface. So the smooth tiles here I think really add a wonderful sense of scale, especially when it is juxtaposed against a massive amount of incredibly intricate greebling. At the end of the day, in universe, these things are massive, almost floating cities, roughly 1.5 kilometers long, and housing, I think, tens of thousands of crew at a time. It means that these layers are several stories high, and the peaks and troughs found within the smaller greebling details could represent a couple of building stories or several, in fact. Now I think it's worth getting into some of the closer details. Here's a nice look at some of those lasers that we've got, but the greebling here on the side, I cannot illustrate to you guys enough how precise the placements of these have to be. What's funny is when taking a close look here, you can see that some are a little bit wobbly, not all the clips are lined up quite right, some of the bars aren't perfectly parallel to each other, but in fact, a lot of this clip detailing had to be pretty darn precise in order for any of it to fit. There is a distinction in this build between the older, thicker clips and the more rounded ones that are newer, and they look a little bit more rigid and nicer for this model to make up a lot of the detailing, these older ones, but they're also very, very tight and difficult to manipulate once you've placed slightly incorrect, especially if there's like 3 in a row. And you know what's interesting here is that beneath all of this greebling detailing are a lot of flat plates. The fact is you just don't ever see any of it, and instead you have a lot of little areas that in the shadows get crushed completely to black, and it really adds for a much deeper and darker sense of depth to this model. All along the edges of the ship we have tile pieces that are clipped in. This takes some serious finger dexterity. My thumbs were hurting quite a bit after playing around with this area, but man, just looking at all of this put together in the final product totally made it worth it for me. On the whole, there aren't actually a ton of unique pieces used for greebling here and there. It's basically a combination of bars, clips, panels, and, you know, a few unique things here and there to kind of break it up. But in reality, a lot of detailing actually would be pretty uniform, and I have a feeling is pretty uniform when you start taking a closer look at studio models themselves. Honestly, I could just pour over the details that are seen on this ship forever. Everybody in the studio has been gawking at it since it's been completed. And even though up close some of my connections here might look slightly clumsy, I'm just noticing it now, there was actually a lot of effort put in here to get them to line up nice and close. Now for some nice smooth detailing, let's take a look at the head of the ship. The area with the bridge has always been such an interesting wonderful combinations of shapes, and the way all of these panel plates line up is really seamless. Now I couldn't help myself when looking at the back of the head. I took out a couple of the original pieces and replaced a few of them just to have fun here. It might be a bit fat, but lengthwise it actually scales pretty darn well with the Star Destroyer here, the little Falcon sitting on the back of the model. Alrighty, now let's jump into the bottom of the build. You might be able to guess that yes, this designer has decided to make it look just as good from the bottom as to the top. You actually see the Star Destroyer from below a lot in the movies, and in certain ways it is kind of more detailed there, especially the main hangar in the center. I've added the blockade runner just for a second from the older set, which actually scales pretty darn well with this build. And normally those two little clips, at least in one particular shot, held on to two TIE fighters that escorted a shuttle that came out of the smaller hangar in the front. But when you look at the back here, just look at all the combinations of different plates and tiles. There's geometric shapes being created, jagged lines, and we've already had conversations now with our final display options for this model to maybe put it on top of a mirror so you can see the underside a little bit more clearly. That could be pretty cool. And I also appreciate that this designer decided to bring the Star Destroyer up a bit off of the ground compared to the other UCS builds. Also, this was kind of a fun thing I wanted to point out. We have a couple of little micro builds that I just added on after the fact. There is a Falcon, he's blowing up a TIE fighter. Couple of TIEs in pursuit as well. One's taken a shot. And just in case you're curious, I did the measurements. These are pretty darn perfectly close to accurate scale. Behind we have a shuttle with a couple of TIE escorts. And if you want, you can build them on your own. I have included a parts list and technically building instructions, but you know, there's only like one step really involved for any of them. It's not really what this model was designed for necessarily, but it's kind of fun to play around with turning it into a diorama. The body itself can basically become its own action diorama in a certain sense. But now it is time to take everything apart, and we are going to move this into the other room so I can do a comparison with this next to the other two Star Destroyers. The model itself is built in a way that's very logical. It comes apart in several modular chunks. Some are plates that rest relatively easily on top of the surface, while we have other areas of the build that really slot in a bit more deeply. After you've removed all those pieces, it's still very heavy, probably close to around 30 pounds, I'd say, and I like to pick it up by holding the frame and getting my hand underneath the stand. Now it's in our studio. Let me show you how it comes back together a little bit more closely. This front panel's pretty straightforward. It slots in pretty easily. There's only one correct orientation, so there's no way to put it on incorrectly. And then this is the smallest little bit. It kind of slides between a couple of little rail pieces. You can see those jumpers make a little bit of a lip at the bottom. And then after that is placed in, we get to take a look at the two turbo laser chunks, the 4 different massive turrets. There is a left and a right side for these. They're nearly identical builds, but there is one little divot taken out so it doesn't bump into this massive piece when you lay it down. It's got a really solid Technic frame. You get kind of an idea of what that Technic frame looks like, and it kind of carries over. even thicker on the inside of the Star Destroyer. This one takes a little bit more precision placement. There's lots of greebling on either side, so you have to make sure you do it nice and gently. And of course, there are things that if you've built them slightly out of place, slightly wrong, they might accidentally catch on this. And I definitely had one or two testing moments when first putting this massive piece into the model after I built it the first time. These two plates fit on pretty easily. That front one is slightly looser, though it actually has a pretty nice way of slotting between a few different plate pieces in the front, and that top panel piece fits on just fine. There's some guiding little pieces towards the front corner. Now we're looking at the bridge, or the massive subassembly that makes up the bridge, and quite a bit more. There is a rail system that slides neatly into the back here, and you can see that I am checking to make sure none of the little bits of greebling like the bars and clips and panel pieces are getting in the way as I slide it in. I probably tested and tweaked this subassembly more than the other ones just because there are so many little sides that it can run into as you're sliding it along the rail tracks. And for the most part, it's a pretty seamless or smooth transition, though you did just see one little door pop off the side. All said and done, that's still pretty good. So officially, unofficially, we've now entered the handling section of this video. Nothing here in particular can come off too easily. The very intricate greebling detailing is actually stuck on quite well. There is no specific single spot on this ship where I feel like it's holding on by a feather or just a few studs. Of course, you can wobble the ship around if you want, just a little bit. You can move it, slide it very easily, and we're certainly not nervous if someone were to bump the side of the ship on accident a little bit or bump the table that it's standing on. It's a really, really solid structure. For the most part, I'm just very happy that this build can be moved around with relative ease for its size. Taking off the outer pieces isn't really a difficult task, and putting them back on isn't either. So when I have to transport this from one place to another, it's not like the biggest task in the world. But now I think it's time to transition over to the comparison of this model and the other two UCS Star Destroyers that came before it. It's really, really cool seeing all three of them together like this. You can see that they leave a similar size footprint, though the tiled version from 2 Impaired is still a bit bigger. And let's just take a look at them individually first so you get an idea of what their greebling style is and their general proportions. The 2002 version is very different because it does have the old gray, and ours is permadusty. I don't know the term for that. I recently redid the internal structure and took out the old magnet pieces and replaced them with mixels, so the bottom tiles, the bottom panels I should say, could stay on a little bit better, though the internal Technic structure is permanently bent and the nose is dipping down. Now this latest version, the one that just came out for 2019, solid improvement across the board. This is still a wonderful model. The greeble details are nice, the proportions are really, really solid, and there's a few detractors here and there, like seeing some colors pop through some of the corners. The middle seam still isn't that tight, but by no means is this UCS model really lacking in any way. It's still a very, very solid Lego set. And I mean, you've already seen a lot of the closer details of this latest Star Destroyer, but here's just one more closer look. Also, by the way, that head was actually built slightly incorrectly. Let me show you the image here and the image here. Tiny little greeble detailing is different. And right, back to the comparison. The scales are pretty close together. It looks like they could just be slightly different versions of Star Destroyers that are slightly different sizes. I don't know how much that happened within the Star Wars universe, but in terms of total detail, the Eviscerator Imperial Star Destroyer really does feel completely next level. It is certainly one of the more ambitious builds that we've ever decided to undertake, both in terms of size and complexity. But of course, whenever we decide to do something crazy like this, we never regret it. The benefits when it comes to time, effort, and energy usually end up paying back when you get such an amazing final product. I can't wait to start building more microships to play around with, maybe a fleet battle at some point. But anyways, that is something for the future. Remember guys, if you do want to build this giant Lego set for yourself, we do sell the instructions at our web store, www.brickvault.toys. Let me know what types of custom builds you'd like to see us do in the future. Thank you so much for watching everyone, and we'll see you next time at BrickVault.